So Andrew, yeah, so what's your background?
One important part of it is I trained with a genius named Moshe Feldenkrais. And Feldenkrais had a theory about how to improve brain functioning. And we demonstrate that it's useful by helping kids with cerebral palsy move better, or people recovering from stroke, or people with ordinary back problems. It's all about how the brain, the nervous system, controls body movement. But his approach could be applied to any skilled behavior. So I've applied it to creativity training. I wrote a book called Creativity Games, improv games, and some other approaches. But they're not just for fun. They're to actually teach people how to play with ideas the way great innovators do. And they also teach collaboration, which all improv folks know, and that's also a brilliant part of it. These are techniques people can use for themselves to resolve their own emotional triggers. One of them is something called EFT. It's tap in on acupressure points. It really works. There are some others as well. But the part that's relevant to climate change is if people are traumatized, they don't necessarily think well. Often, in fact, they think aggressively. There's a lot of mental disturbance in the populace. This makes it easy to respond to demagogues, easy to go to war, get enraged, those bad guys. And people who lack connection with something deeper in themselves quite readily exploit others or attack the environment. Yeah? So, part of my vision for a movement to evolve a healthy culture includes people who've done some kind of inner work introducing these kinds of techniques to other people. And they do this not as psychotherapists, but as trainers, which is a very different order of things. There's a psychological system, let's call it, a view, called internal family systems therapy, otherwise known as IFS. And the view there, which I subscribe to, is that we all have different parts inside of us, including a part that worries, including, and see if this is familiar to you, the critic. Do you have an internal critic?
If you're asking me, I don't often hear a voice that says "you stupid girl" or anything like that. No.
Good.
I'm
Yay.
Fortunate.
But you know that such a thing exists in many people.
Yes, I do. I do. Yes.
So we can regard that as a part. And as a part, this is the thing about parts, it has its own agenda. It wants to help us, but it'll often do it in ways that in present time might seem a bit bizarre. Now, the exciting thing is, two exciting things. We can talk to those parts and indeed negotiate with them, find out what they're on about, what they're accomplished, and then negotiate a better way for them to have a role in our psyche, or if they're traumatized, there are techniques that can relieve the trauma, and then the whole internal life changes. And the other exciting, so we can change it. That's the first thing. Second thing is when the parts heal or when they simply move aside for a time, what emerges, people say when this aspect emerges, oh, that's not a part, that's me. So what emerges is the core self. And the thing about the core self in everybody, this is what the IFS folks say after 40 years of this kind of inquiry with patients, clients. Oh, the core self is centered, courageous, compassionate, creative, curious. All these good things without effort. And with that goes the notion that the core self is never damaged, no matter how traumatized the person has been, because other parts take the hit, so to speak, and they protect that part. But when it emerges in the course of a counseling session or a therapy session, it's also wise and knows what to do to heal the injured parts of the psyche. So the IFS goal is to bring to the core self to the fore as much as possible so that the therapist can step back and just kind of monitor or help, but not be the center of attention.
Sounds great.
This also, as we get into it, we've got some time, as I describe what I'm doing with Inspiring Transition. I'm asking people to step up to a new order of leadership. And what I find is that in that conversation with caring people who are very intelligent, knowledgeable, often some other aspect of the psyche comes in and deflects the conversation. So some part of them comes in and gets in the way. My challenge as one who wants co-leaders is to find ways to make that conscious and deal with it, help the person deal with it so they become empowered to be to another level of collaborative leadership. I haven't cracked that yet. I've had some successes with my challenges, but it's a learning curve. But that's the new zone of inquiry for me. So it gives you a bit about me. There's probably more, but that'll do for now. And since you and I have the conversation, Darren, how about introducing yourself?
Okay, so my name's Darren D. I'm a dad of 3 beautiful young ladies. So, the reason this is important to me is obviously I think about their future and their children's future that I'll never get to see. So long story short, so I've been in the world of coaching since 2001 was when I originally trained, 2001, 2002. I'm on the global board of the Association for Coaching, so I have been for 18 years. So I'm part of that core team that really drive that organisation. So recently moved into Australia, which was really exciting about 2 years ago. So I'm really fascinated about, and we're ambassadors, and we signed the joint agreement between APEX, EMCC, ICF, ourselves around the Coaching Climate Alliance. We really believe in it. So I'm on here to listen to see what more we need to do as a professional body to support this great cause and all the fantastic coaches and that whole community that's developing. I'm going to be launching a podcast series where I interview all sorts of different speakers about this, which will be June, July, because we've got other things going on at the moment. I'm also the founder of Mo Foundation, which is a charity that gifts coaching, has gifted over £2.5 million worth of development in the last 9 years.
What's the foundation name?
It's called MOE Foundation, mofoundation.com. And yeah, really good news. We've just announced that in April we come to Australia and New Zealand. So that's really exciting. So we're just starting to bring it, and we're working with a wonderful charity and also QUT. But we're working with Your Town. So I don't know if you know them. Apparently they're quite a big Australian charity. They've got quite a lot of support for very young people and families in very deprived areas. So my background, long story short, was fairly poor in terms of money, but rich in terms of love. And so I saw the impact of people that had no love. And, we were surrounded by it as a kid. So I called that poverty mindset. And it's about, but I realized that poverty mindset is much broader than just kids that grow up in poor areas. It's everywhere. And so we support through training and development to help people, that we give them coaching skills and entrepreneurial. We support them with a dream factory. We run a conference. There's all sorts of different things. And then to earn a living, I've been a chief executive of a tech company, which I stopped a couple of years ago. I've run my own consultancy organization. I've worked at Deloitte. I've done all sorts of different things. So I have a real portfolio life. I do love that. COVID has been a really fascinating, challenging time for me personally. I found it very challenging to see my liberty and our liberty go as a community. I think, you know, coming from the UK, I think very strong libertarian views. So it's been quite interesting. But I'm at that place of it's good. I'm really glad that we're coming out of it now, and I've actually started to really enjoy the time I've had with the girls, especially around their schooling. So yeah, and I was why this? I mean, I've always been really fascinated by this, but I was also mentored by a guy that you may well have heard of if you're in that space at all, Sir John Whitmore. So John and I were very close. Yeah, he mentored me, and we started to try and launch something about climate in 2007 in the AC. And it completely flunked. It just didn't go anywhere. So then I went and created Mo Foundation, because I couldn't do it under AC. So I went and created Mo Foundation, which isn't about climate. It's more about sort of you know, psychology, entrepreneurship, well-being, confidence. Originally in young people, but now we work in. So we work directly in prisons. We work with the African Prison Project. We work with social care. We work with all sorts of different organisations, job centres. So Mo has sort of morphed into all sorts of different areas through its model, and it's got a ridiculous model that gifts our trainings. We use a high trust model, so if you can afford to contribute something, please do, and if you can't, then don't worry, you get exactly the same experience. And it works, is the beautiful thing I can tell you. It works. 9 years on, we're still sustainable. So
generosity with spirit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like you live in the ACT. Is that a right conclusion?
No, I live. Sorry, I live in the UK. I live in St Albans.
Oh, okay.
So
I
London.
thought you said you were in Australia as well. Yeah.
No, I'm saying we're just launching. We launched the AC in Australia a couple of years ago, and now Mo is launching. You know, into Australia and New Zealand as well. So, and I lived in Australia a long time ago. So 1995, 1996, I did a backpackers year there, and I loved it. I love Australia. So there you
go. Yay. And Samia, tell us.
Oh, okay. Well, Darren, that sounds all lovely. Great story. Love it. Yeah. Okay, myself. Well, if you start with the kids, I'll start with the kids as well. I've got 2 boys, and it is definitely an incentive. There are times when I do think, why did I have them? not because they bother me and I can't stand them. I do worry. I do worry about the legacy we are leaving behind, what we are giving them. And as much as my sisters would have wanted kids, I sometimes envy them, and I've told them that, you know, I think you oh, here you go, here's one of them, just bring me a cup of tea. Thank you, love.
Yay.
Thank you, darling. We will get interrupted when they say goodnight. I've told them they can come, because I thought it was going to be many of us and I was just going to black my screen, but if you don't mind them coming to kiss me goodnight, sorry about that. So yeah, so I do, and I've told my sisters, you know, I do envy in a way that they can just go without worry. They'll just head off and that'll be it. Whereas the worry does make us, I guess, the positive on this is want to do something more than if we didn't have kids. In a way, we have a bigger drive, I suppose. Well, for me anyway, I just want to make sure they have a better world.
There are many responses, but that's the one that makes sense, doesn't it? Proactive. Yeah,
it does to me anyway. I have to say, it really does. It talks to me, and I'm sure there are other people who think differently, who have different drivers. But I think thinking about the future generations is probably the biggest one. Yeah. And also coming here brings together my passions, which are I'm a business psychologist by background. And I started life off as a business psychologist, and then I decided I needed a real job. Went to Penguin Books and did a couple of years there, but needed the variety of consulting, so I went back to consulting at PwC. So I think you said KPMG, sort of similar kind of thing there, and worked on big transformation programs in the change area on the people side. So big transformation programs, leadership change, culture change, IT change, that kind of stuff. And then we moved abroad as a family, and I decided for work-life balance and for something to do, which I loved, was focus on coaching, which really brought together my skills. And then having come back from being abroad for about 10, 11 years, so we lived in Abu Dhabi, then Malaysia, and then Oman, and now we're back. I'm continuing with my coaching, but it's like, what do I do with it? Where else can I go with this? And I just thought, wow, when I heard about the CCA, approximately 10, 11, 12 months ago, I just thought, that's exactly what I want to be doing. Climate coaching, coaching in this environment, helping with sustainability leaders. And where I can't, because I haven't got the budget, I haven't got the power, I've got the potential to help them to achieve what they can achieve with their bigger budgets and bigger names and bigger organizations than I'm part of. And so that's how I've come to put together my travel passions, my kids, my love of coaching, the business psychology, but also interests that I had from a long time ago, but didn't quite realize. You know, I did geography and biology A level, and I loved all the aspect of the ecosystem and urbanization and climate change back then, and deforestation and all that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of pulled all of that together. And I'm here with that. And so today, actually, I was presenting. Oh, and Andrew, what you said really resonates with me, because I've got a background in NLP as well, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
So the parts bit, talking to each other, is not weird for me. I know it is weird for many people, but it's not weird for me. So I'm with you, totally with you on that. And so, but I was going to say something on that front. So with the NLP. I do help out on NLP courses, and today I did a presentation at 3 o'clock UK time. You may be interested in seeing it, because I think what you're saying kind of works with what I was presenting, which is a model of leadership and coaching, and helping people really look at themselves and being driven by their way of being. So complementing all other leadership models, which is about what to do, how to do it. You must be collaborative, you must be systems thinking, you must be this, you have to be that. I'm not prescribing anything. I'm just saying, come from your own way of being, work as part of a system, operate as part of the system, engage with people, collaborate, and all the rest of it. Yet at the core is the individual themselves. So I'm just wondering where all that kind of thinking actually ties in with your thinking, because it sounded to me like some of the stuff you said earlier on really, yeah, it makes sense, it links, it correlates with some of the stuff that I talk about. So here we are, that's me.
Excellent,
yeah.
Excellent. A comment about my own journey. Some years ago, I went through a personal epiphany where I became committed to the well-being of coming generations, which both of you have talked about. And I shifted from being a pessimistic idealist who knew all the troubles of the world to being a committed optimist.
Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting to find out about that journey, but yeah.
There are many journeys, aren't there? So, both of you are very experienced, and I invite you, as we go through the things we talk about, which we will bring in your critical intelligence. So if something's missing or not quite right or whatever, feel free to challenge. That's what mature people do. I expect a lot of it will simply resonate with you, but let's see how we go.
Wonderful.
Oh, that's good, Dee. That works actually.
Yeah.
You're on your phone.
Yeah, I did it on my phone.
That works. It works well.
Elevate it slightly. I haven't really got anything. Oh.
Now, Andrew, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you've got the sun on half of your face and we can't see your eye. You've obviously got a very nice, bright, sunny day. We've got a nice.
Just coming, just got over the horizon. It's in the morning. I'll change it.
I think that'll work because we can see your chair now as well.
Oh, it's a handsome chair too.
What time is it with you, Andrew?
It's 7:30 Sydney time.
Okay, it's 9:30 over here.
Just a moment.
Whilst you get yourself sorted, Darren, are you going to be at the talk, the 11 o'clock one? I'm just wondering, do I stay up? Do I not?
Yeah, I'm going to go to it, just to hope, just to listen in. Really, I'm really fascinated to hear people's experiences, and yeah.
Yeah, I might do the same. It's only an hour and a half away, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, so this is our theme. And I'm going to take you through some ideas fairly quickly. We're talking about climate coaching. The good news is that there are people really doing what I call raising the alarm. So we think of the school strike for climate, Greta Thunberg, Extinction Rebellion. I think it's really valuable that they are raising the alarm. But there's much more going on than just climate change. So I developed a tool called Looming Disasters. And it's a tool for a conversation to bring home to people some of the other aspects. And it's loose leaf papers. You print it out on just a sheet of paper. It's not bound. It's not a book. It's a very intentionally informal presentation. So I show this, and we have a talk about plastics. A lot of the stuff people know already, which is good. People might not know about the possibility of a massive methane release from the East Siberian ice shelf, but that's the one that would keep me awake at night if I didn't happen to sleep well. Lurking time bomb.
Is that underneath the permafrost? Did I just read? That's if the permafrost comes out, the methane will be released.
No, the permaculture is another methane source. Under the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic East Siberian ice shelf, as it's called, is a very shallow ocean, a few hundred meters deep, rumbled terrain underneath. It's also permafrost. Scientists thought for years that this permafrost was incredibly frozen. It's really thick, really cold, and therefore the gas hydrates underneath, methane trapped in ice crystals, couldn't possibly get through. And then maybe 15 years ago, a Russian research ship noticed bubbles of methane coming up. And then since then, lots of research shows increasing bubbles, gyres of it. And the theory is that there are 50 billion tons that could come up in a big all at once, which happened apparently once millions of years ago. So it's called a methane burp. And if that happened, the temperatures would spike globally to 6 degrees and it's game over. Why is the methane coming through? It's not clear, but obviously it is. My guess is that because as a consequence of global warming, actually, the land balances are changing, that stresses, and the permafrost is cracking. Anyway, so there's a chance for that conversation. We could talk about rivers that no longer reach the sea, dropping water tables and aquifers. That has obvious consequences for food, finally. Toxins in the food chain, the amount of animal mass we have. You get the idea. So,
yep.
Just pause here a minute. So the point of that is just to have a conversation to bring home to people a reason why we should change, because we're on track to change disastrously anyway. Somebody was coming in, they disappeared, I guess. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it a couple steps further. I came across this cartoon.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, it's not, but it is.
Exactly. My description is we have a system that is devouring the earth. So we could call this a wicked problem. Many factors, no simple solution. And the question is, how do we orient ourselves with a wicked problem? One approach is to set a positive goal to work towards. So it's improvised, no blueprint, but something to work towards. One possible way to phrase such a goal is a life-affirming culture. Now, indicatively, a life-affirming culture is these kinds of things. It's an umbrella term that encompasses the values and practical actions of much, if not all, of the environmental progressive movement. It's meant to be an umbrella term, something we could all say, yeah, we're part of this, we support this, we make this happen. So what do you think about that goal as a goal?
Which goal? Sorry, Andrew, just which?
The goal of transitioning to a life-affirming culture.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry, yeah. So, okay.
Piece of cake.
May I ask, Andrew, what does a life-affirming culture mean to you?
Yeah.
My background's philosophy, so the abstract answer is it's a culture that takes care of the planet, the rest of nature, and takes care of people.
In symbiosis.
So I talked about EFT. I've been known to do EFT with strangers on the train. 2-hour ride from Sydney to the Blue Mountains. That's a contribution to a life-affirming culture. There are people who run programs to teach new parents how to be gentler with their kids, less punitive, more nurturing. That's a contribution to a life-affirming culture. People going into permaculture, people doing industrial design to eliminate the toxins and reduce their ecological footprint. That's a contribution to a life-affirming culture. How does that sound to you, Samia?
Yes, I mean, that's basically giving what you can, where you can, to who you can, how you can.
And
somehow
the spirit of generosity, exactly, which has already been exhibited in our conversation here. Yay. But there's much more to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm expecting that this conversation will stretch your thinking a little bit. We'll see how it goes.
Forward to that.
I put up this example. It's got renewable energy here, solar power. But let's be honest, since it's a small group. Solar panels, there's a term called energy return on energy invested. If you actually build a solar panel or anything, you expend energy not only manufacturing it, but getting the raw materials, doing the mining, doing the processing, all of that. So there's something called the extended return on investment. And the question some engineers have asked is, with solar panels, do you get more energy back than you put into it? The answer is no. So these solar panels we see on roofs and that we celebrate, are actually subsidized by fossil fuels. And if fossil fuels went, solar panels would be untenable. They couldn't reproduce themselves for the next generation. So I think it's important for people to get that, because it suggests that if we want to have a viable society, it's not just enough to get out of renewable energy. We really have to design for really low energy inputs, which is a major change in lifestyles across the board. Comments about that? What do you think?
Terrible. It's obviously worrying that we're selling a solution that is potentially worse than the problem. We're using up more than we're making out of the solution, which is supposed to make more than it's using.
Boy, well put.
So why are we doing this? So to your point then is, we could calculate that actually we're using all this fossil fuel to make all these panels. Well, to make all these panels.
Yes.
Once this is gone, we've then got this, that if we keep them and maintain them and manage them well, just like I've got clothes that actually still look great and I bought them 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm not one for shopping. I'm one for good quality and it looks good. I don't need to go shopping every month to buy myself the new outfit. So if you kept the solar panels for generations to come, the amount would hopefully eventually work out, because these are long-term panels that you could keep for a long time over generations. But then you've got numbers of people that are getting bigger. And so what you're saying is we need to manage our energy consumptions as well. So there's
all of these come into the discussion. Yeah. And some would point out that even if that's the current case, to some degree, maybe the design of solar panels will improve and so forth. So it's not cut and dried, but as you, along the lines you're thinking, it is something to think about.
Darren?
Yeah, the rational, logical part of me goes, I'd love to see the numbers on that. I don't know the concept of what we're saying. I completely understand. It's the I'm going into the so what's then. So what's beyond that then?
Look, I can send you a summary article that just came out on the topic. Yeah, I'll do that afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Can you give us maybe a sentence or two that would summarize the article, Andrew?
Sure. A couple of researchers in Spain, I think, reviewed the literature on energy return and energy investment. They talked about the different ways to measure it. So if you measure it just manufacturing costs, solar energy is a plus. If you include the resource, the extended version I talked about, then it's a minus. And they give the numbers to show that. So,
okay.
Okay, let me keep going. Question, if this is the goal, how do we seed the goal and the understanding of the goal into mainstream thinking? And excitingly, we have a resource that we haven't thought about, which is the members of the millions of groups that care about environmental and social well-being. Paul Hawken wrote a book more than a decade ago called Blessed Unrest. And it was, he said, He and his team did the research, and there are more than 1 million groups at the time he wrote it. It's probably a couple million now. Most of them small, some just 2 or 3 people, some quite large, like Avaz, Get Up, Move On in the US. But they exist, and the members have their own personal connections and social networks. So my thought was, well, if we can inspire them to be evolutionaries, citizen educators, and specifically ask them to talk with their friends and neighbors about climate change and the larger environmental trends, and about the systems change, which we'll get to in a moment, then we have the capacity to bypass mainstream media in catalyzing the conversations and thinking that will actually perhaps shift the culture. And my stake in the game is I'm committed to actually winning, not just doing stuff, not talking about stuff, but if the goal is to shift the culture, then let's aim for that. So I developed a tool called Kitchen Table Conversations. One of them is, this is a model of labels on beer coasters. I got the idea from a former stage magician who said people like to have physical objects to hang ideas on. Now, really, this is just a set of labels, but they're movable and they give a feeling of tangibility. So I will show you how it works. We start by laying out these 4 pieces, and there's a connection between stuff, meaning physical objects that are manufactured, and CO2 emissions and other environmental damage. So as a proxy for what makes CO2 emissions go up, we can ask what factors in the way our society operates make the amount of stuff go up. Just for fun, what's the first idea that comes to your mind?
Consumerism.
Consumerism. And how about something like this? Retail therapy part of it?
Yeah, definitely. Advertising's part of it. Feeding that need that we must have.
Oh, yes. You deserve it besides. So that's the open question part. The rest, frankly, turns into a presentation. But a slowed down presentation, I'll take it with us fairly quickly, but at any point in a real conversation, people say, what about this, what about that? And go off on divergence and think about it. It's all good. So beyond advertising, we have the large trade agreements. So I bring that in, but when I bring in corporate control of governments, people nod their heads. That's intuitively understood. And this feeds the wealthy elites whose forebears set it up, and they keep it going. Now we come to the big one. This whole system is driven by devotion to economic growth. And the assertion is that economic growth drives increased stuff, and therefore it drives increasing global warming and increasing environmental damage. What do you make of that proposition?
Darren, do you want to say?
Well, I think that's part of the reality that we live in, and part of the rhetoric that we live in, which for me, I find disempowers lots of people, and also in some ways it says to them, well, I don't have to take responsibility because it's the global elite's fault, it's the government's fault, it's the corporation's fault, it's not my fault. So I think there's that, and I think the other thing that just comes up to me is I think this is a hugely complex, interdependent whole system change of issues. Psychology is massively important part of this, so I think we'd all probably subscribe to, an awareness and consciousness and things like that. But and I think what does need to happen, and I've just finished a series on health and well-being, a podcast series, and what was so fascinating interviewing these 8 or 9 different people was just how, if you want to make change happen, just start with some micro habits. Just start with one micro habit, and then that will the ripple effect of that one micro habit will change. So for instance, since I finished that, I've lost 9 pounds in weight in just over 8 days, because I'm like, actually, I need to change my diet. I need to just do some, and all I did was I started to walk 4 miles a day. Then as soon as I did that, I started to eat more greens. And in that very short space of time, I'm seeing the health benefits already. And it's, I need to get that sorted. But it was like, I was inspired by listening to these 8 or 9 different people. So I think, Andrew, I think this is such a complex issue. And I think it's like, how can we help people to identify what are the sort of micro habits and micro decisions we can all make as consumers, as people, as part of this 7.4 billion or whatever it is. If we do this one action, what would it do? I think that's, for me, it's great to have, and not about you, Andrew, I'm talking more broadly, it's such a complex challenge, and it's also, it depends on where you are in like, we're very fortunate in the UK and Australia in terms of the economic stability of our, notwithstanding what's gone on recently, but economically stable for most of us. We're in the top 1%, I would guess, all of us, in terms of when you look at, the 1% population in the world, and you go, my God, I'm part of the 1%. Now, I'm not part of the 0.01%, the global elites, but I'm part of the 1%. Just by having a home in London or in St Albans, you're probably part of the 1%. Can't say for Australian, so I don't know. So for me, I think the game you shared, I think, is a great way to kind of have the dialogue and conversation. And I think the thing is, for most of us, and I put myself in this bucket, this is such a complex series of interdependent challenges that I haven't got a freaking clue of what should I do. And I'm honest about it. And I'm saying, so just let's think it through and come up with some really useful micro habits. So I consume less, we travel less, we do those things. But what else in a meaningful way can we do? I don't buy stuff. I don't buy lots of clothes. My wife buys clothes for me because I don't buy myself anything. So it's not that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's how can we start unraveling, an individual level? Then absolutely agree with you, Andrew, on community and communities of interest and how they can coalesce and collaborate and really get into that space is fascinating. Then corporations and political leaders and all that other good stuff. And the global elite, you don't worry about them. I don't even know who they are. Are they the Bill Gates of this world or someone else? Or is it Amazon, Bezos? Is it Bezos, that? Or is it Elon Musk who's trying to put people on Mars? I don't know. So I think, it brings up lots of different thoughts for me, just to kind of stop there.
That's why we're having the conversation. Samia, any responses to that?
I have, but just that Elon Musk's made me make some cynical connection here, which is terrible. I'm not usually this cynical. He's wanting to put people on Mars. So the worse the planet gets, the more of a driver he has to get people on Mars, the more people will back him on getting people on Mars, the more he has privileges to get people on Mars. That's just a thought I've had.
You make a pun here, Sam. Could we call that escapism?
Thank God for Elon Musk. He's going to save us and get us to escape to Mars. What comes to mind is, and I'm quite sure that you must have heard of her, and if you haven't, that's okay too, Kate Raworth and her model of economics.
Yes, donut economics. It's on
yeah,
the slide
donut
deck.
economics.
Have you heard of that, Darren?
No, I haven't heard of it. Go for it. Donut economics, did you say?
Let me
Yeah,
show you the model. I'll show
I've
you the
heard the
model.
phrase. I didn't.
So,
Andrew will share it.
Brilliant.
Essentially, whilst he's looking for it, if you don't mind, Andrew.
yeah, keep going. That's fine.
It works with the UN. The UN has come up with sustainability development goals, 17, is it 17 or 19? 17 of them. And Kate Raworth is an economist by background, and she was unhappy with the theories of economy that have been prevalent and prevailing in the world of today since industrialization, really, and how it's been all about growth. And here I am advocating growth, but I'm talking about the internal growth of the human being, staying within their shape. But here we're talking about growth, which works with the image that Andrew shared of that machine sucking up everything and throwing it out as rubbish. And so she has come up with a model, which I think Andrew will take us through briefly now.
Oh, just very briefly. She talks about the planetary boundaries, the external boundaries that we have to operate within. That notion was pioneered by Rockström at the Stockholm Environmental Institute. So climate change, actually with CO2, are outside the appropriate living boundaries. But importantly, she also talked about the it's called the boundaries of well-being on the inside. So if you don't have enough clean water, you're not going to have health. If you don't have education, you're not going to do very well in life, and so forth. So all these personal social factors are inside, the institutional environmental factors are on the outside. And it's lovely she found a way to synthesize them.
And in her model, depending on which space and part of the world you're in and what part of the economy you're talking about, she shows how the different parts of it are bigger in one area, smaller in another. How much of the boundary have you pushed against food and water in that particular part of the world? How much have you pushed against with jobs and voice, that kind of stuff? So it's quite a dynamic model, and it works with the various parts of the world. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Worth looking at. What do you think of it, Andrew? Hello.
Janine.
Oh, good morning, Janine.
Empower's a nice name.
Janine, we're in full flight and doing well. And we've just hit a intriguing part of the conversation, which is about my assertion was that economic growth drives environmental destruction. And we're having a conversation about what to do about that. And it's just about to get contentious. So let's have some fun.
So Andrew, my question was to you then. What do you think of this model? What's your view on it? Where does this take you? And do you even want to talk about it? Because I know you've got more on your presentation to do. But yeah,
I'll answer your question, but then I'll come back to the economic growth question. So I talk about, we agreed on the goal of a life-affirming culture. When I break it down into principles, and I learned how to think in terms of operating principles from my engineering training at Princeton, there are two main operating principles. It has to be ecologically sustainable. So that's the outer rim of Kate's diagram, yeah? It also has to operate on caring for people and the planet, which Riane Eisler calls partnership respect relating, which more or less maps, if you unpack it, into the inner ring of Kate's diagram. So, and these principles show up on the ground as all these practical actions that are going on, and many more. So it's all of a piece between the goal and the practical action. They're not separate, they're all of a piece. Okay, but now I want to come back to the discussion about economics because that's critical. So, Darren, you said, first thing you said, if I picked it up right, was, not sure that we should demonize the wealthy elites, something like that. I agree about not demonizing, but I would ask a question. Is it true that over the last 30 years, the wealthy elites have arranged to have the taxes give more money to them, less to most people, and hollow out social safety nets and the middle class? Is that going on or not?
Well, I think, first off, I don't think I said don't demonize them. I think I said, actually, if we focus on them, we're disempowering ourselves. So that's slightly different lens to put on it.
Yep, that's more accurate. I get that. Sure.
Yeah. So I choose not to focus my personal attention on, I think, I don't know, but I know economically I'm in the top 1% in the global economy. I know that. I don't consider myself in the global elite. I'm not in the 0.01%. So it depends on what we mean. Are we talking about are we just talking about a few individuals? Are we talking about a community of billionaires, which has grown immensely over the last few years? Are we talking about multimillionaires? Are we talking about the 1% of citizens across the world that, have in excess of, I don't know what it is, 500, 600,000 pounds or whatever it is
So
to get you in the
let me
1%?
get precise about that. I live on a very modest income, but I'm in the top 1%, the way you frame it. And I'm blessed. Yeah. The assertion is, without being paranoid, that there are people who have interests in their own wealth and well-being, and they make investments in politics, for example, to elect politicians who, by and large, will accede to their interests. That's a general principle. Now, the specifics of it, if you ask for evidence, there's a remarkable book called Dark Money by Jane Meyer in the US. She describes, with great insight and lots of research, the tactics of the Koch brothers. You've heard of the Koch brothers?
Don't know them, no.
Koch, billionaires. Oh, back in the 1970s or something, one of them ran for office and didn't get anywhere. And it occurred to them that their values were around minimum regulation, minimum environmental regulation, and maximum liberty. So, and they're devoted to economic increase. So they thought, well, at the time, in the US, the public was not open to that message. And they realized that if they were to get their worldview out there, they really had to change people's thinking, they had to change their mindsets. So they funded very smart people to write articles about their philosophy. They funded university departments even, think tanks. Cato Institute was one, Heartland Institute was another. They funded some real grassroots groups. People got really passionate about their ideals. They also funded some fake ones, and lots of stuff in the media. It was brilliant. In terms of strategy, in my view, they were streaks ahead of the environmental progressive movement. Streaks ahead. Because they had a unified message, a goal, and they understood it was about mindset change. Whereas the environmental progressive movement has a million voices and thinks it's just about broadcasting their thing, their message, with no unification. The result was they and people like them were so successful that America is the polarized country it is today. It wasn't like that 40 years ago. In fact, America was, the notion of environmental sustainability was very meaningful to people. We had the environmental protection agencies. All that was really in accord with American and Australian and global values. And now it's controversial. They achieved that. They were brilliant. So again, it's not about demonizing anybody, but it is recognized that there are people with money who operate in a way that is not advantageous to the planet or our own ordinary well-being. And if that's the case, my thesis is we need to shift the system. And part of it is, again, the theme here, challenging economic growth as a guiding value. So the way I challenge it, I say economic growth, just per se, whatever the social consequences, because it always requires increased industrial production, it always requires increased environmental damage. Question is that a valid assertion? What do you think?
If you're asking me, so I think, yeah, I focus on growth where we can see it. Your cartoon is a really simple but elegant way of demonstrating that growth of things and growth of things. You know, Bhutan, was it gross domestic, no, growth and happiness, isn't it, in Bhutan? But is Bhutan? I don't know what Bhutan looks like. Yeah, and I think absolutely we need a different mindset and a different focus. I've no doubt. What I'm intrigued is, so what are some of the solutions? That's what I'd love to see, or what some of the ideas.
So the level of thinking that you've been resonating at is personal actions that will have a ripple-on effect and magnify to some degree. And if I hear you right, when you look at the idea of the economic system, and the whole system is really complex, it almost seems too complex to even think about. So let's do something local where we can get some action going. Many people think that, and correctly so. It's big, and at first sight, it's mind-boggling. So what I've tried to do, which I'm presenting here, is to find a way to make it mentally manageable. So to do that by talking about the operating principles, caring for people is one, environmental limits is the other. And to also ask the question, which the Koch's model is about, what are the main drivers that make environmental issues worse? We'll return to that in a minute because we didn't finish it, but my thought is that, well, a couple of thoughts here. First, on our own, that system is so big, we can't influence it. I can't. Even organizations can't really influence those big drivers. They can't influence the policies of economic, the trade agreements. They can't even influence the COP agreements, at least until recently. The American government was against making COP real. That's shifting, but that's the history of it. A story I often tell, which is relevant to this, is an Australian politician said to me once, "Andrew, we politicians can't get too far ahead of the people." I thought that's right. So if it's true, as I think it's true, that we actually need to change economic policy, for any political leader to have any traction with that, he or she needs prior public will. So I'm trying to affect people's mindsets, again, the Koch Brothers strategy, if you will, affect their mindsets by having conversations using these models to prepare the ground for the deeper thought by people who have a capacity to carry out their ideas to how do we change to have an economy of well-being.
I'll tell you what comes to mind. Sorry, you're asking the question. Sorry, you're still pondering. Yeah, okay. What comes to mind is your statement of politicians cannot act until they've got permission by the people, which that's how they get elected. Yet sadly, as parents, if we only did what our children wanted to do, would we be driving them with good values and ways of being? I'm just thinking they still need guidance. And if we know better, we are there to help them to grow and develop and get good morals and ethics and sharing and, you know, all the stuff that you do when they're two. No, no, darling, you've got to share. The same goes on throughout life, and it's the same for politicians who understand these issues that we're talking about.
So let me respond to that. Could I?
Yes.
I'll pick up on that one. So yes,
Yeah.
Children need adult leadership. Democracies need competent leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes,
yes, all leaderships are different in the situation. Absolutely, yeah.
Some of the politicians who get elected are competent. They've been really, but there are also many politicians who are elected who are venial, mean-hearted, even cruel. Again, it's not about demonizing, but we should be able to recognize collectively the difference. And downstream, we should vote in qualified politicians who care about the environment and know what that means. Here in Australia, we just had a major election, well, 2 years ago. We were on a 3-year cycle. The major activist groups pushed really hard to get some of the more extreme right-wing people out of government. And by and large, they failed. The Conservative Party that won really pushed jobs and growth, downplayed the climate, didn't talk about the environment. And jobs and growth won, and that makes sense from a certain point of view, at least to me. But jobs and growth is pushing the levers in the wrong direction. So again, the thought is, if we're even going to elect competent people, we have to get the prior public will so that such people will have a chance.
So if you Jeannie, I'm conscious that you might have something you want to say. So by all means, drop in if I ask a question. So I think what I was looking for.
I'll give a little context. Jeannie is my support person. And this is the second time we've gone through it, so she's au fait with the.
Oh, I see now. That's great.
You came in very late. My apologies.
No problem. You're doing great. Glad to see you.
It's good.
Glad to see you.
I did a TEDx, and in there I talked about for systems change. Yes, we need an individual level. We need to identify personal responsibilities. Communities are hugely important. Also, we've got to influence organisations, corporations, and the leadership in those organisations. And then I also said political leaders, but I spent no time trying to focus on those. Because the point that you were saying just a minute ago, Samara, is that yes, we vote them in, but then Boris Johnson and his wonderful team have done what the hell they want in this period and spent money. I just can't believe how they've spent the money. But anyway, that's an aside.
I'll tell you what they're spending it on: roadworks outside.
I just wanted to respond to your question about, am I thinking just at that level? No, I'm not. I was talking about on a personal level. I want to understand what can I do to support, but I'm very aware of it's at different levels and at different layers. So I've another question for you, which is it not just inevitable what's going to happen? Because ultimately what we're talking about is the human condition, human psychology, human mindset to be able to connect to other people and care about them as much as you care about your own family. And I see very little experience of people being able to do that on a mass scale. And that's not criticism. That's also, I see it when I go traveling, as I've done, when we're allowed, and when I was single and no children, I used to go off and spend time in very impoverished areas. And actually there was a real sense of community, and they lived very humble lives. And it was incredible to be around that community and that love. And it was almost like that was the way that the world used to be. But as we've progressed the world and they've urbanized it and everything else, and we put people into these little areas and go, oh, you should be all right, it kind of creates certain tensions in human beings. So just to sort of, just to go a bit deeper with your psychotherapeutic background, you've obviously thought about this huge amount. Is it
Sure,
inevitable, or do you have hope?
Right. So I would say the betting odds are that we will fail. You've probably heard of Jem Bendel.
No.
Very, very smart guy, and really thought about this stuff and concluded it's too late. He wrote a paper about that, and he said we should grieve and then enjoy life as much as possible. Be nice to people.
Right.
It's a position.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I went through an epiphany where I became committed to the well-being of coming generations. I simply have decided with others to do my best.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me speak to the hopeful side. We see the worst aspects of human nature sometimes, and the best parts aren't reported on much. But there is a large trend called cultural creatives. Have you heard of that notion?
Mm-hmm.
Some years ago, it was measured to be about 35% of the American population were people who cared about the environment, were not overly invested in making money. Of course, they decent living, that's fine. Probably raise their kids in more caring ways than historically was the case. And a growing trend. And there are counter trends. Stresses make it harder to be that kind of a person, I imagine. From the psychotherapeutic model, again, the Buddhists have for millennia said the core of human nature is basic goodness. What the internal family systems folks found over 40 years of exploring in people. And they found this not theoretically, just purely empirically, almost by accident. When the distorted parts are healed or moved aside, what emerges is a caring core self. And it's there in everybody, no matter what their trauma has been. So theoretically, under Mr. Trump, there would be the same core self. I was fascinated during the American election. I watched many videos by a woman named Marianne Williamson. She was famous. Some quote of hers was quoted by Nelson Mandela. So a spiritual teacher, very savvy, and a brilliant intellect.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a number of hour-long or more videos of her talking to different audiences. Each talk was different. Each one was without notes. Very clear about various policies, even had a military policy. And she was coming from self, in my view. No axe to grind, which is the criteria. So that's why I think that the psychological side of getting people to resolve the issues is a really important part of conversation and action. I want to scale it up.
Mm. And the vehicles to scale it up? What are some of your thoughts around the vehicles for that? The games, the books, but on a mass scale with these communities?
Yep. So I'll come back. Scaling up means having a distribution system. Mm-hmm. So that's where this idea comes in. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. It's one that hasn't worked yet, but I will persevere with it. There's a group called Mind Valley.
Mm-hmm.
It's a personal development institute. The CEO of it, the head of it, Vishen, is, I think, both caring and brilliant. And he's probably got 1 million members in his network now.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent an email saying, I have a proposal, climate change is real, your people could become citizen educators, leaders in their own right. Let's talk about it together. Interestingly, I didn't get a response yet. What I think that means is that email has probably not been just discarded. It's probably working its way through a system. But if he says, yes, let's have a talk, and then says, yes, I like your ideas, Andrew, then we can get some portion of his talented group of people to start these conversations. Likewise, there's a group with Aves, again, millions of members. Aves, the leadership thinks in terms of issues of the day. They don't think in terms of system change, so far as I can tell. But if they did, same thing. So that's the model. Back to business. The famous business case for sustainability is interface carpets. Have you heard of them?
What was the name? Sorry.
Interface carpets, Ray Anderson.
No, don't know it.
Okay, so a couple decades ago, first, Interface Carpets is a transnational carpet company. So they sold carpets around the world. The story goes that the CEO, Ray Anderson, was asked by his environmental department, because everybody had an environmental department in those days, Mr. Anderson, would you give a talk to our company event we're putting on? Sure, I'll do that, but what do I know about sustainability except we should follow the law? It happened just at the time that a friend he trusted sent him a book by Paul Hawken called The Ecology of Commerce. And it was a book about how business practices are destroying the environment. And Paul Hawken is brilliant, both in his thinking and in his articulation. So, and said, I read that book. It talks about, quote, the death of species, was one chapter. And it put a spear through my heart. And I said, we can't keep doing business this way. It's kind of a Georgia accent, which I can't imitate very well. So he invited Paul Henrik Robert, who founded the Natural Step in Sweden, which is a way of working through, is a company sustainable or not? What are the principles of sustainability? He trained his whole staff in these principles of ecological sustainability. And as a result, two things happened. People noticed enormous amounts of waste they'd never seen before. And they changed their business model. Instead of selling carpet, they leased carpet in the form of carpet tiles. So if under contract you get these tiles, if some part wears out, we will replace it as part of the contract, but the rest of it just stays on the floor. It's not wasted. Very clever. They took the carpet back and worked out ways to recycle the carpet into raw materials again. That was brilliant. They were also honest. They said, we've set our goal to be totally ecologically sustainable, no damage. And each year they would report on their progress or lack of it. So they're a real model, and many other organizations have picked up on the natural step and applying it. But, and here's the but and the possibility, there's a limit. They were only thinking in terms of the company Gates and their extended supply chain. They didn't take responsibility for saying, look, we have a whole culture, going back to the cartoon, that isn't working. We have to change the whole culture. So my vision is that leaders of companies like Interface, who actually have environmental values, could take on the next step and begin to articulate the goal of a life-affirming culture, to publicly question economic growth and all that model, and even train their staff into the staff's willing, to conduct kitchen table conversations. So that's my model for taking it to scale.
Okay, so the role of the citizen educators, what's the nature of the role and the development journey they take people on?
Oh, it just, here's how it would work. It would start with an invitation. Jane would be willing to have coffee with me for an hour and have a deep conversation, however they frame it. Intuitively, they have some idea of where Jane's understanding is. If Jane hasn't thought about the environment, then the conversation might be using looming disasters, that tool I showed you, just to make it real. So that's a critical starting point. But if Jane already is concerned about climate change, for example, then they just conduct the beer coasters conversation and a couple of other things. The idea is not to, people say, well, what do you want people to do at a practical level? I don't want to do that. I just want to change the mindset as rapidly as possible. But experience shows that when people are concerned, they often find things to do. They join organizations, they change their own lifestyles, they refuse to have children, whatever. Yeah.
And the mindset shift you perceive that will start us to move in the right direction is the life-affirming culture and the principles that you've built into the triangle that you demonstrated earlier.
Yes.
Those are some of the fundamental principles that
Yeah.
the people will support them with.
And there are lessons that we haven't taken from the Koch brothers, you say?
KOCH, Koch Brothers.
Yeah. How they managed to make mindsets work and change with their barrage of bits that they were integrating within society, from the education system to the media. What's stopping environmentalists, scientists, and government from being able to do that? It would be great to be able to model excellence on that model.
The primary thing I think that stops them is they never occurred to them.
Having said that, though, governments use the media beautifully. So
No, governments won't buy it because governments, the culture at large believes in economic growth.
Yes, there is still the economic principles at stake here.
Yeah, and the people that have the most money influence in governments are devoted to economic growth. So there's a link there, of course, well known. But why shouldn't environmentalists, ordinary people, scientists, they do talk about it, they think in their own way. They talk about their piece of the puzzle. So my suggestion is keep on doing that. Do your own thing. It's all relevant and passionate. And in addition, add the layer of, let's talk about the goal of a life-affirming culture. And let's do that as a contrast to economic growth as a guiding goal for the culture, because we want to promote well-being.
So it's grassroots systemic change, little by little, the voice of the people.
No, grassroots understanding of systemic change. Can you see the difference?
Understanding, which then hopefully will lead to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No
Good.
guarantee, but that's the goal.
Yeah, because it's a change of a mindset, but the mindset is for what purpose? Hopefully to act, to achieve.
Absolutely. I want to win. I'm devoted
Yeah.
to winning. It's not just a talk fest.
Yeah.
Do you see communities like you mentioned it earlier? So Findhorn, which I've been to in Scotland. So is that a sort of the community? Is that, because for people to go on this journey, they have to quite fundamentally change the way they live their lives. Cars they drive, things in order to stop economic growth. Is you've got to say, actually, we need to stabilize. We all need to
all of that
stabilize.
Sure.
Yeah. So are there communities where you see that this is working? And the reason I'm asking is because, for instance, so with my charity, we work with Guernsey. Guernsey is an island, it's its own country, 60,000 people, and it's its own country, so it does things very differently to the UK, and we've got lots of relationships there. So have you thought about where you can explore in some of these smaller countries or these smaller regions to start to play with some of this thinking and start to
let me tell you where it's at. I'll tell you where it's at. We have a small platform is called Inspiring Transition. We have a small core of people that are driving it, and an extended network. We have no strategy except I, by impulse, reach out to people who I think are potential colleagues. When I heard about these climate change coaching coming up, I said, oh, great place to present. I'm looking for colleagues. So, as the military would say in their dark language, a target of opportunity. So that's how I work. I don't say, oh, how can we affect any country? I do think how to affect particular organizations, but that's the way I go about it.
Yeah, well, I'm just, I know Mind Valley, so I don't know Vishan personally, but I've got, friends who know Vishan. And so I was thinking about what you said about the email you sent to someone like that. And it's just, I think part of what you're sharing, Andrew, it needs to be brought to life in more depth. And it just needs to be brought to life in more depth, because I think, I don't walk away from this going, I understand what it is. I understand part of it, and I don't think I'm stupid, although I probably am, but I think it's, no, it wasn't, it was a joke slightly, but I think it's like, how can you, in order to influence, go to the next level of thinking and actually start to bring it to life, and have you got some training to support these people? I'm just, the pragmatist.
No, we have
the pragmatist in me. It just, that's, I always think, and this is my personal preference, is theory is interesting, but what I really love is experimentation and doing stuff. That's where I always go.
Well, what I've done, let me just respond to that, because I love your pragmatism. First, there's the book, Kitchen Table Conversations.
Yeah.
More to the point, this much shorter article that I'll put in the chat box, which is the title of this webinar, Catalyzing Mass Commitment to Transformational Change. So it describes the beer coaches' models and the theory and all of that. There's another article on introducing a new paradigm for social change. It's actually not one, but it's a number of ways of thinking that would be very useful for the environmental progressive movement to adopt, that they don't know about yet, by and large. And
can I just say, there's nothing in the chat on my side. I'm wondering if you've just managed to send it to Dee.
I'll put it in the chat box now.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Well, you can probably just get our email addresses and just that might be easier. But...
Oh, it's all there. It's all there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I would like your email addresses for sure.
Yeah, well, mine's really simple. Darren@darrenrobson.com. So that's my personal one. So
we'll Darren.
Darren @darrenrobson.com.
Spell your last name, please.
ROBSON.
.com.
And you've already, and then you can see me on Mo Foundation. You can see me on Association for Coaching as well. So I think just to summarize,
more.
Go for it.
So we also have the training videos. So it's prepared to people online. We have the beer coasters are physical, so we have a kit that people can buy at modest expense. A few people around the world have them already. So everything to actually make it work has been designed as a starting point. No doubt there can be improvement. If Vishen picks up on this, you would see 100 ways to make the presentation vastly better, I'm sure. But it's good to go for starters.
I mean, from what I'm hearing, is that there's a passion to make things happen, and you've got a voice that you're sharing and you're putting out there, and you're seeking the right people to speak to and for them to hear you. But the next bit is action, and it's who's going to take the action. That's what I'm hearing, rightly or wrongly. And I'm just wondering, just today I was, unfortunately I missed the first hour because I was in another session, but it was a 2-hour-long session, and I came in halfway through with agreement with the organisers. And it was about the session on Wales and what Wales is doing, and how the Welsh government is one of the first governments to actually take action and put sustainability development as part of policy. and they're making that much more tangible and making people do something as part of politics. It's that the leader we were talking about, you know, us as parents needing to lead our children, the same sort of principle, but they're taking that in and actioning on it, and it's kind of like,
respond to that. This is a hard thing to get, so let me have a go. It's why I call it a new paradigm. But I didn't invent the pieces. Other people invented the pieces. So there's a famous article by a woman named Donella Meadows called "Leverage Points: Places to Intervene in a System."
mm-hmm.
Now, when I introduced myself, I said I professionally have been improving people's thinking for decades. So that's the leverage point. Changing minds, changing behaviors. Mindset change comes first. What Meadows said, really importantly, was there are different levels of change. So we have the action levels down here. But she thought the most influential level was in what she called people's paradigms and in their goals. So we're looking up here.
And we know with COVID, the goals and paradigms can change like that. So yes, things may take years and mindsets may take years, but nobody thought coaching over Zoom would be so good. As an example of paradigm shift, and this is on a small scale of me in my dining room and me in my study here. And there's so much that's happened with COVID that our mindsets of understanding what change is and how it can happen and what we can achieve in such a short space of time has shifted. We must be able to take that and not take so long to take our mindset changes.
So let's stay with that a minute in terms of the economic part, in terms of a healthy culture. So here in Australia, we moved really quickly to have social distancing, physical distancing, better language, masking and all of that, quarantines. And we're one of the most successful countries in the world at keeping COVID levels low. We've also invested massive amounts of money in supporting people, as has Great Britain. But the government of the day is determined to get back to economic growth as fast as possible. So that fundamental paradigm hasn't shifted. In the US, Biden is going all out for phase out fossil fuels, electrical vehicles. No conversation about slowing the economy. And I don't expect it either for reasons we've already talked about. So again, I'm not after action with this. I want a movement to shift the paradigm. The actions will follow in a multitude of ways.
And I think to challenge that model slightly, so forgive me, but I'm going to, it's really interesting actually, because the action we're talking about is the action of challenging the paradigm. So there is actually a circular relationship there that's not identified. It's not linear. There is actually a relationship here. What we're talking about is how do you educate a whole series of people that can take action to help people to raise their awareness of paradigms in order to make sustainable change on a major level. So that's the action that I'm talking about. Yeah. So
I
it's
like it. I'm with you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's needed. And I think, yeah, I think what you need to do is just the pragmatist again is just, you know, I've got access to thousands of coaches. Like within my own charity, I've got 1,000 coaches. Like within Association for Coaching, we've got over 9,000 members. We've got 20,000 people on our database. I mean, Hetty Einzig, who's part of the CCA, who's our ambassador, is somebody you must meet, Andrew, and talk to Hetty. She's my friend and colleague, and she's our person that me. And I think you'd love what you'd love with Hetty that I can't offer you is that she's thought like you have on all these theories, and she is a theorist and loves that, and an academic and a writer, and so she's looked at all these models as well. And so I think you'd really enjoy with that engagement. And then I think it's like, so once you've had that conversation, understand it, is that where I can support you is actually, why don't we identify, you may well have already done it, are you testing this with a group of people? Because if you can get a few people to understand it, and the CCA are a great vehicle for this, I think, because you've got lots of psychologists, therapists, coaches, counsellors in this community. So that's a good set of people potentially, you know, that you can test it with, because they've got some interesting mindset shift.
So here's my invitation to both of you, because you both get it. Would you be willing to consider yourself as colleagues with me, and we'll work together with others?
I'm very happy to be a collaborator. If that a colleague means a collaborator,
yeah,
and if I can
collaborate.
connect you,
yeah,
I'm very happy to connect you to a few key people to help see, to deep dive into it, to see how credible is it, what is it, how does it work, how do you see all of that stuff, that's not my skill set. What I do is listen for opportunities to connect people and then connect them into the right people. You know, that's one of the things that I'm good at, I think. But yeah, so I'm very happy to kind of support you exploring that and see if I can find some people, well, I can find some people that would enjoy engaging in that conversation. I'd be happy to have a look at it as well. You know, but I'm not a trainer, for instance. That's not where my skill set lies. I work with trainers. I have lots of trainers that work with me because I'm just not very good at that stuff. I do it once and then I'm bored. I'm on to the next thing.
Collaborate in ways that make sense to them. So here we are. You have your own ways.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to spread the word. And I think at the same time, this is what we're doing here with the CCA. Anyway, so you've come to the right place.
100%.
You've come to the right place to help us all shift our mindset, to help us all gain awareness of what it is that we are here to do. You know, that question that is there for today's conversation, what is mine to do? Mm-hmm. So you've definitely come to the right place. And I'm happy to take this conversation to whoever I want, you know, whoever I meet, whoever I can take it to. I'm not necessarily one to do any training or big talks, I suppose. I've got my other things that I'm involved in, but I will definitely be one to take that mindset, because everything you've spoken about today makes complete sense to me. It's part of my thinking. Obviously, you've got more knowledge in the detail of all of that than I have, but at the same time, I understand what you're talking about, and I am very happy to share it and collaborate. I don't know what I could do, but I am happy to be in this space, and an idea will be sparked and I will say, Andrew, I can do this, or Andrew, what about that? So at the moment, I'm not sure what it is mine to do, but I am happy to keep that question in my mind.
There you go.
And help collaborate where I can.
Something will emerge, I'm sure.
Yes, and that's how it works. That it's a seed. It's a seed, and it will go somewhere. I'm quite certain.
I'm hoping that CC's Climate Coaching Alliance will get enthusiastic about this level, and then and we'll work out from that enthusiasm what's the appropriate steps. But yeah, I've got a lot of ideas. First thing is, the fact that people are concerned about climate doesn't mean people know what to do about it. There are fundamental concepts. One's called the natural step that I mentioned. Another one's called ecological footprint. Another's overshoot. Some people know, some people don't. So there's just an educational piece, I think, at that level for climate coaches to just upskill themselves. Because if our maps aren't rich enough, then we won't have that much ability to guide business leaders, for example.
Have you? There is another community as well called Climate Coaches. I was just going to look it up, but I won't bother. You can do. You know, there's they're actually, you know, as well as CCA, there is actually some people that are climate coaches. The other person, I don't know if you know them, but it might be worth being a fellow Aussie, is Clover Hogan, who is, you know, she's a 21-year-old Aussie girl that is just blowing up around the whole environmental sustainability piece, Andrew. So, you know, Clover's, you know, fantastic. I think she's been on stage with Greta and people like that. I mean, she's, you know, she really is.
No, I don't know. That's odd.
Look up Clover, and it's oh gosh, I can't remember what the name of their organisation is. It's out of my head at the moment. But again, I know, you know, I'm connected to Clover. So yeah. So there's multiple levels. There's CCA, great for coaches. You know, I can connect you up to some people. Hetty, you should meet. Clover would be a good person for you to kind of duel and discuss with.